Welcome back for our second video of our driver training tutorial series. Today we're going to go into a bit more detail into Racetrack Builder and some of the different tools that we can use in the program. So let's jump into it. So we have our Newcastle kart track that we built last time. At the moment it's just a pretty basic sort of model. There's not really any features of notice around the place. So we're going to look at how we can add a few of those in. So first thing is this terrain tab. At the moment we're using the Google Maps elevation data. We can actually, for some reason, you might want to adjust manually some of the terrain. With the elevation data turned on, you'll see that we don't have that option here to adjust the terrain heights. So to do that, if we go in here, edit, to venue, plugins, we can actually go height here and we can turn off our elevation API. So once we've turned that off, you'll notice there's different icons here where we can actually raise and lower the terrain. So using our circle tool, for example, if you've ever been to Newcastle, you'll realize that this corner over here has quite an elevation gain. So we might want to raise the elevation over here. Depending how big our circle is, using control and moving our mouse, will determine how big the impact area for our elevation change is. So if I just left click there, perhaps I can raise the elevation a bit. Obviously you'd want to bit around the edge there too. Control Z if you go a bit too far. If you want to lower the elevation, you hold shift and left click and it'll bring it down. Alright, so we have some sort of elevation gain there, maybe a bit too high there. Another way that we can adjust it is by using these, edit the actual nodes. So any of these, sometimes the Google Maps data might have a node that's a bit misplaced, and you can just click on each of these and move them up or down, like so. This is where obviously the mesh refinement that we did before comes in handy because we have a larger amount of nodes here. And we could refine that further if we wanted to. And something else you notice is some of these areas aren't refined as nicely as others. How we can fix this is if we go to subdivide triangles, and if we just click on any of these areas, you can see we're getting rid of the larger size meshes there, giving a more uniform mesh throughout. So that's just a nice way to tidy it up, and avoids any weird sort of results that you might be getting. So we go through, tidy a few of those up around our track. So I'm just left clicking there. Oop, that's actually raising the terrain now. That's no good. Alright, so we're going to have to decrease our strength off when we're doing that. So then we can do our triangles without actually impacting our terrain. Alright. So that's a different way you can, if you need to adjust the height, we can go back in here and put our API back on, and it saves all the changes we've made. But it then reduces us to these three tools. Another tool we can use is painting the terrain. So I'm going to turn my wireframe off. You can see the Google Maps image doesn't have amazing color for the grass or anything. If you want to fix that, you can kind of spray paint the area a bit, depending how high your strength is, how much it's going to do. So that's a bit dark. And if you want to get rid of it, Control Z doesn't get rid of it, so you have to actually paint over it with that white color there. So that's the annoying part there. Right, but I might want to put a bit of green on just over the whole sort of area. Just make it look a bit more realistic. If you get rid of the terrain like too much like I've done there, by putting that white color on, it can be hard to get back, which is a bit annoying. Alright, so that's some of the different tools we can have in the terrain tab. If we go over to tracks now, something that you might have to do pretty commonly is overlay different tracks. So we're going to add in these two shortcuts here. So just add in a simple straight shortcut there, and another one over here. You can see obviously they don't really line up very nicely at the moment. So we're going to edit the cross sections for each. I'm going to hold X because I only want to move in the X direction. Same thing on this side. And now this is where it can get a bit fiddly, and really you just need to play around with it a bit to get it nicely linked up. You can sometimes try to move the nodes and attempt to join the track because it's not on the end of the other track. It usually doesn't let you do that there. Alright, so I'm adjusting that. Still looks a little bit too wide for this side here. Alright, so I'd recommend not painting the terrain first actually, because that restricts the amount of our track underneath that we can see. There, yeah, that looks pretty good. Alright, now here's where you get these ugly sort of joins. This is where our hierarchy system comes in. So this one's track 3, that one's track 2. So I want those to be cut by track. And I'm going to do this track to cut track. And you can see that's fixed up a lot of our issues we were having. But we're still going to have to adjust these a bit. So the best way to kind of do this is to get down low to the ground, and you can usually see if it needs to go up or down. And then you're literally just moving each of these sides to suit. So you obviously want it to join up nicely at the track itself. Because this is being cut by the track afterwards, it doesn't matter too much what we do after that. It's useful actually to have a different color track like we have at the moment, because it allows you to see a bit easier. Another thing you can see there is we have quite a bit of a hill going on over there. So we could lower those, and that's got rid of that. Do the same thing on this side. Whole track needs to go up a bit. So you kind of want it to be just where it crosses over. And something that you might have to do is add more cross sections. Just gives you a better ability to adjust it in different regions. But sometimes you might have multiple cross sections. So we got a bit of a bump there. Something else you can see if you turn your wireframe on, when you're clicked on the track, you can actually see the track of the mesh of the track. If you add more nodes, that's going to change your mesh. Ideally, you'd want it to be fairly square. That is quite rectangular there, so you might even want to get rid of some of your nodes and have more an even sort of mesh. If you get rid of them on one side, it'll also get rid of them on the other side. Alright, so that's looking better. It's definitely not ideal. Add another cross section in there. But good enough at the moment. You'll have to just play around with it a bit and make nice sort of joins. Alright, so I'll finish this one off. So you can see we have this region under here where the edge of our track slopes down. We can bring that up a little bit wider to fix that. Alright, so our tracks are joined there. I'm just going to leave them that color. Next thing we'll go on to is this red tab here, objects. This is where you can obviously add different objects. At the moment you'll see we have a few options here for different things we can add. Tires, cones, rumple strips. If we want to have everything available, we can go in here, edit X packs. You remember at the start we chose race day as our expansion pack. We can actually include all of these, and that'll give us access to all the different objects that Racetrack Builder has by default. You can actually download other specific ones that other people have created if you want to further expand your horizons, or if there's anything that's missing that you desperately need to add in. But I found that pretty much everything that you'll need is in these different packs. Alright, so we might need to add some cones. For example, we might want to slalom down this straight here, as you typically find in a Formula FSAE style track. So I've clicked on cones. You can select what color cone you want. Now we can add the object in different ways. We can add just a single object. We can add a group of objects in a straight line. We can add a lasso of objects, or you can add them to the roadside. Just goes on the side of the road. I'm actually not really sure what the practicality of that one is, but that's alright. So we might want to have a straight line selection here. Our separation we might want 20. Alright, that looks pretty decent. Now each of these, once you move them, they're going to be their own individual objects now. So whenever you're adjusting an object, you'll have this sort of interface here. You have these 3 arrows on either end. You can stretch or shrink your object in those directions. You can move it using these bars, or you can rotate using any one of these 3 angled things on the side. But yeah, pretty simple, straightforward. So we might want to, these are probably a bit large for cones in real life, so if we go to move an existing object, hold shift and circle them all, we can select all of them, and now they're all grouped under this one toggle in the center, and we can shrink these a bit so that they're more realistic size. Alright. So you also have this properties tab. So if I click up here, properties, object properties, you can have different things like if you want to cast a shadow, if it's movable, Something I found, having movable cones, obviously much more realistic, but doing driver training, people will just cut the corners and your track will disappear. So I've actually been putting it on collide or drivable. Drivable means that they'll just hit the cones and it'll potentially cause the car to flip. The idea behind that is so hopefully next time they won't hit the cones. Alright, so we have a bit of a slalom there. Something that you'll probably have to do a lot is place cones, the directional cones on either side. So I'm going to put one of them on each of those. And I'm going to edit each of these. Another way I can select all of them is just hold shift and click on them each individually. It just saves time when I want to adjust the size of a group of cones. Basically always they're too large when you first put them in. Alright. So what you want to do is move it to position and then rotate it down and then you just bring it up. And then yeah, just position it so that it's as close as possible to the ground because obviously you don't want it to look like it's floating. Yeah, so that's something like that. And we'll do that for each of these. Alright, so you'll see we now have our beautiful looking slalom there. Obviously the direction that the cone is pointing in is the direction that you want to drive the car around. You can, most of the time, the easiest way I've found to position these cones, you might have a map of whatever layout that you want to achieve. The most practical way is just debasing it what your eye can see. But you can place in these coordinates here. So if you did have a set of coordinates, you potentially could work out using your maths where you need all the cones exactly to be. But in most cases, you won't have a set of coordinates, you'll just have a visual image. So that's usually the best way. Alright, so that's the cone aspect. Something else you might want to add is trees. So if you go in here, trees, you have a bunch of different trees that you could potentially use. And you see here we have a lot of trees around the edge. This doesn't really do anything to the track itself, obviously, it's just a more visual aspect. So we might add those in a lasso arrangement. And we might want to turn our density down to maybe 25 or so. Don't want any on the road. I'm just going to add those around. So I'm holding my left mouse in, and then I release. We go down to our track, we can see that they are quite large. And you see even with the density of 25, there is still a lot of trees there. So if I don't release those, I can now go move. And I can do the same thing with the cones. I can reduce the size of each of those so that it looks somewhat more realistic. Alright, yeah, I'm pretty happy with that. Obviously, we could do the entire map if we wanted to, but you're not going to see that and it's going to take up a lot of storage space. You'd realistically only want the regions around the track that you can actually see. We can also add in a bunch of other objects. The rumple strips here, you might go to add them in, but they're, even in a straight line, it's not really an ideal way of doing it, so we'll go through a better way of putting those in now. So if we go across here to the orange tab, string objects, we can add in a bunch of different things, such as maybe a tire wall. Obviously string objects are going to be a string of objects. So you can see we have a bunch of tire walls around the place, so I might just add in straight lines for the tire walls. I'm just left clicking. If you want to do a new one, you just have to click on that again and have a new string. I'll add in the rest of the tire walls. I found that the size of the tire walls that I added in are actually pretty realistic, and most of the times they don't really need adjusting, unlike our trees and other objects. So I might have a freehand draw here. So I'll just left click for all the nodes that I want to place. Or I can use curve maybe. Yeah, that works better. When you come to a sharp corner like that, if we tried to go through and do our curve, sometimes it ends up being a bit annoying in the corner. So usually it's best to just add another wall. But you can again change the properties of each. So if I click up the top right properties, I can do different things, cast a shadow, have them drivable so that it's more realistic when they crash into them. Or sometimes you don't really need that. We can also adjust the size of the tire wall here with the different scale options. So each of these you have your X, your Y, or your Z. If you tick that and change one of these, you should be able to change one of the scales. Yeah, but there's a bunch of different settings that you can play around with in there. You can also, sorry, you have to click on this first up here. So you'll click on the tire wall, and then we can adjust the scale. So that's why it wasn't working before. On 50, you can see now our Y direction, which they've defined as the Y direction, is now half. Alright, so we can also add rumple strips, something you commonly would need. Again, these are added in the same way as your tire walls. We'll just add one around this corner here. You want it to be overlapping a bit with your track. And then obviously you can move each of these nodes individually. Usually the ripple strips I found they're quite large. So I'll click up here, the pattern, so the whole pattern, and I can adjust the scale of the object. So maybe I want to go down to 70, and that should be the width of the ripple strip. Yeah. You can also, if you for some reason you wanted to do just one of them, click on that. Sometimes, like this one's pretty good. Sometimes it'll be going into the ground, so you can actually rotate it. I can rotate it that way. I can rotate it this way. So you might have an angled ripple strip or whatever you want to model. Yeah, so I'll just go through and quickly add a few ripple strips around our track. Alright, so you can see we've added in a bunch of our ripple strips. If I was doing this properly, I would go through and adjust each of them nicely. You can see they're quite large at the moment. So I'd go through, unfortunately you can't select multiple, so you'd have to go through individually and change the scale on each of them, which is a bit of a pain. But yeah, so it doesn't take long to get a functioning track in Racetrack Builder, but to get a nice detailed track can take quite a bit longer. And really all this is doing is just adding details and making it feel more realistic. Something else that we can add that also makes it a bit more realistic is painted lines. You could try and play with the actual texture of the track itself, but that is a bit of a nightmare, and I found that it's just easier to draw in your lines around the edge of the track. So literally you just go, we might want just a solid white line, and then go around the whole track, just left clicking and placing nodes as you go. Alright, so I'll quickly draw these lines on and get back to you. Alright, so we have our line around one edge of our track there. Just like all our other controls, if for some reason you want to add a node in a certain section, you just hold control and click. We should have to go to edit first, hold control and click to add a node in that section. And then you can move them all and adjust them. So obviously you do that on both sides to make it look a bit more realistic. I found that using these lines, say we're on the Charlestown rooftop car park, and we just have a bunch of cones that are our track, so we don't actually have this distinct track layout. Having these lines around either edge of our track can help people not to become disorientated with the vast amount of cones. Especially some of the non-drivers in our team struggled getting lost on the simulator because it can be hard to tell which way around the track you're actually supposed to go. Alright, so that's all I'll go through with the string objects. Again, if you want to change anything, you can adjust it in the properties tab up here. Alright, so the only other tool we have here is the walls tab. This is similar to the string objects, they just give us a bit more control. For example, we might have some sort of fence over here. So we can click in our fence. So what you'll notice is that when we're looking at it this way, you can't actually see anything. And when we're looking at it this way, you can. So that's because it's one-sided at the moment. If we click on here, we can have it double-sided. So then we can see it from both sides. So that's up here in properties. If we only want to view it from our track, we can just have it one-sided. But it doesn't take a lot more memory realistically to have both sides on there, unless we have a lot of fences everywhere. So the difference with the fences is that we can adjust the cross section. So for example, this one, we can adjust just one half of the fence, the height of it. If we have maybe a cement wall, so you might have, maybe we have a cement wall here or something. So I add in a cement wall. If we go to cross section, we can now adjust both in the X and the Y direction. So that just gives us a bit more control when we're making our walls and fences. Because if you go in here, string objects, you can see you can actually put in walls as well. I might put in that wall, but then I can't adjust the actual physical cross section of it as easily. I could change the scale, but that just gives you more control. And having, if for some reason you want one half of the wall bigger or something like that. Alright, so I think that's just about everything to cover. We have also in here our file racetrack builder settings. We can change here how fine we want our mesh to be able to be. If for some reason you want it to be incredibly fine, and different things in there, but most of those, yeah, you won't use a lot. Alright, so we have more of a detailed track now, which we can go test in Assetto Corsa. So we'll go save, and we'll export that and do the same process as we did before, and I'll see you in Assetto Corsa. Alright, so I'm just going to delete the old KN5 file and replace it with a new one. Alright, so we've loaded up our track in Assetto Corsa. You can see the slaloms that we've added. You can also see the curves that we've added as well, as well as the trees. You can see that in general this just gives us more detailed track, makes it feel more realistic. We've got our shortcut here, and yeah, the best thing is just to test your track out, see where the bumps are, where they shouldn't be, and to see how you can fix those. And it's just a bit of trial and error really. So thanks for joining me in video 2. We'll see you in the next video.